So in using these three things that I'm using today, I am trying to make it less, I can't think of the words because I know my son is over there in the corner listening. Good morning, everyone. It's me, Tanya, coming to you from my kitchen. I have not been knitting quite as much lately because I've been so busy with dyeing and outside work to get ready for strawberry season. So I thought this week, instead of doing a traditional podcast, I would take you with me as I do an indigo dye. Now, if you know anything about indigo dye, you will probably know that it can be very time-consuming and it can involve some pretty nasty chemicals. Typically, you use lye. I did not want to do that because I try to be as environmentally sound as possible, plus the time-consuming, the time it takes to set up an indigo vat and let it ferment and do all of its thing is just more than I had time for. So what I am using are pre-reduced indigo crystals, which come, should have had them all out ready to show you, but alas, I did not. I get mine from Dharma Trading, but they come in a little package like this. They're kind of stinky, truth be told, but the great thing about these pre-reduced crystals is it is a synthetic version of indigo. However, in order to get indigo to be water soluble, so in its natural state it is not water soluble, you have to have both a base and a reducing agent. Now usually you use a chemical as the reducing agent, which I am still using something that is called color remover, which is the chemical sodium hydrosulfite, I believe. I wrote it down. Yep. So I am still using a chemical of sorts. Okay, sorry about that. My son just came in for a moment and I paused the video. But I was saying that you need a base, you need indigo, and you need a reducing agent. So in order to not have to use lye, I am using these pre-reduced indigo crystals. And in place of those strong chemicals, I am using soda ash as my base. Couldn't think of the word there for a minute. I'm using soda ash as my base. It is a lot less intense in terms of how I need to dispose of it. So it's a lot safer for use. It's a soda ash, I believe, occurs naturally in the environment, although I could be wrong on that, in which case I will put the note below. So because I live in Minnesota and it's May 28th today and it's not super warm out, I start the indigo vat inside on my stovetop. However, obviously doing an indigo dye in the house is not recommended, much less in your kitchen. But because it needs to stay at a temperature of 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit in order for it to be fully ready to use, I keep it here on my stovetop for an hour while it is doing that. So I'm going to go get my table ready, my burner ready, my utensils ready, my yarn ready, and I'll kind of show you what kind of yarn I'm dyeing today. And then hopefully in a short time, I'll be ready to dye. Okay, so I'm on to this next step. I thought you might find this interesting. This is the bucket of yarn that I'm going to be dyeing today. And if you kind of look through it, you can see it's different colors. That is because in order to get certain colors, it's basic color theory. You need to have red and blue to make purple, yellow and green, no, yellow and blue to make green, that sort of thing. So some of the yarn, like this yak sock you see on front, that's just gray. This is going to come out blue after I dye it. But some of the stuff we have down below here, we've got pink, that's going to hopefully turn purple. We have some yellow that'll hopefully turn green. I think that's mostly what I have in here is yellow and pink today, and then the plain blue. So you'll get to see that more as I get into the actual dyeing. You'll see how it changes. But for now, my job is I have to make sure all of this is well soaked with water. So the color won't absorb nearly as well if you try to do it with a dry skein. So because I live on a farm where we have our own well, I need to take my water from inside instead of from my hose outside because the chemical components are different. There's a lot more iron and heavy metals when I take it out directly from my hose. So I'm going to be carrying out some buckets of water from my tap water that has been filtered and will not affect the color. So there we go. So I still have 30 minutes left before my indigo vat is ready. So I have decided to set up some madder dye here, and I'm going to get some skeins cooking while I wait. Okay, my hour is just about up. I am back outside and I have brought the pot out. It is staying warm on the burner. I have a couple things left to do here before I can get started. As a side note, you will have seen me stir. This is just a really large paint stick that I got at the paint store. It works great for stirring the indigo vat in the beginning, just because you can really get going fast and it's, you can use it over and over again. So I just store it with my indigo supplies. I will say that the indigo vat itself is quite stinky. So as it gets warmer out in the summer, when I dye more outside, I will be doing everything outside. It just makes life easier. But when it's cooler, it's just harder to keep the temperature. So a couple things I have to do before I get started. I have to skim off the flour. Now the flour is the bit that it looks kind of like bubbles basically. Typically when I stir it, it all goes to the middle. Today I'm a little out of practice because it's my first dye of the new spring year. I haven't dyed this since last summer, so I didn't quite stir it right. So my flour is not nice and neat in the middle. However, this pre-reduced indigo vat is so forgiving. So I'm going to scrape that off here, and I just put it in a tin to dispose of later. You will notice that outside here I am not wearing a mask. Obviously I have lots of ventilation. There's not really a need to wear a mask once you're no longer dealing with the powders. But if it bothers you, I'm turning this off here because I'm noticing that the pot is quite warm. Once I start to dip, that will change because the yarn will cool off the water. Anyway, as I was saying, you could wear a mask if the smell bothers you, but once I'm out here and it's open and we got the fresh air, it's just fine. So let's skim off that flour on the top. Now the goal of an indigo vat is to keep the oxygen out of it. And that's what we did when we stirred this. We caused all the oxygen to come up, and that's why we had to let it sit, because all those bubbles affect the color and it won't be as vibrant. So I am simply going to skim off the bubbles as best as I possibly can. and then I'll dispose of this later. I am going to start with so when I do the dyes, it's always, the vat is always a little bit different. Sometimes it's much stronger, like when it's warm out, if I dye and it's 80 to 90, maybe sometimes I've even dyed out when it was in the 90s, close to 100 degrees outside. The vat is much stronger. If it cools off faster, it's not. So I tend to dye the colors that need the most dye first. So I'm going to do the ones that are gray that I want just true blue to kind of test the strength of my vat. And then I'm going to move on to my pinks and reds that I want to be purple. So before we can't just stick the whole sopping wet, I'll show you here, dripping skein right directly in it, because it will add a lot of oxygen to the vat. So what I'm doing is simply squeezing it out so that it is wet but not dripping. And I use these great reusable zip ties because they're perfect for hanging on the line behind me, but also for preventing tangles. And then when you're going into the vat, the slower you go, the better, because the more you're agitating, the more oxygen you're going to have in your vat. So I just slowly put it in, and then I count, usually a couple seconds, 3-4 seconds. And then as I'm taking it out, this is where you have to be real careful. You squeeze, but gently pull as you squeeze, because you don't want, again, those air bubbles to be too plentiful in your vat. And you can see it's turning. It looks kind of green. I'll give you a close-up view here in a minute. But after it comes out, I squeeze it down just one more time. And then I do turn it on the zip tie, just so you don't, sometimes you'll get like a little mark where the zip tie is, where the dye hasn't penetrated. So I continue to do that. And then I just hang it here behind me on the line. One thing to note, if you are going to try this at home, your water that you're soaking your yarn in before it goes into the indigo vat, try to make it nice and warm and as close to that 80 to 90 degrees as possible, because you will shock the vat a lot less if your yarn is similar in temperature instead of a lot colder. All right, I'm going in with my second skein here. I just have 3 skeins in the basic gray that are going to be dyed blue, and everything else today I'm going to have a different color. So I'm going to do these 3. I'll give you a close-up of them and how their color is changing. So the cool thing about indigo is that when the air hits the dye, there is a process that happens that causes it to change color. So that oxygen in the air is what makes it blue instead of green. If you look at the vat itself, it's really a yellow-green color. It's not a blue color at all. Okay, so I stopped for a bit of a moment here because I wanted to show you this one. So this is, I'm dyeing a lot of yak today, and yak is a natural gray color when it is undyed. And so the change when you do indigo is not quite as obvious because it already has sort of a deep jewel tone hue to begin with. But this is a very tough sock base, so it is the 80-20 base that we have. You see how pink that is? It's quite vibrant. This is the same color as the pink I was dyeing earlier, except it's on a white base instead of a gray base. So this is going to be a lot more dramatic when I put it in the pot. So let's take a look at that. I did cover it up briefly because I was trying to get it warm again. As I said earlier, the temperature drops as you're putting skeins in and out quite a bit. And so I was having to leave my skein in a little bit longer. We'll see, we'll count to 3 here and see if that's enough. Now this doesn't look like it's really doing much of anything yet. Take a peek at that. See how it's changing right before your eyes? So it's looking more like a lavender at the moment, but look, if I didn't shake it out, see all that pink in there, and squeeze the dye as it goes through, then it doesn't have an even distribution of color. Apologies if you can hear the garbage truck. Of course, he picked this very moment to come and collect the garbage. Now, what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to hang it up, and I didn't hold this one in the dye very long. So if I decide that it doesn't get dark enough, I'll put it back in. But look, you can already see it's really getting a lot darker. So like I said, next time I do an indigo vat, maybe I'll take you along if I'm doing more of the white-based yarns. Okay, now we're moving on to the yellow ones. Now these are ones that I have dyed with yellow onion skin to start, and I'm going to dip them in indigo. So they are on the yak base. At least the first ones I have are on the yak base. But if you wanted to try something at home with indigo, and you like green, which is what you get, the yellow onion skins or red onion skins give you a great base to get green when dipped in indigo. So here's what we start out as. It's really hard to show, but it looks more like a brown. It's more of a golden. This is my golden snitch color that's going in here. Now, because we are on DK and it is yak, I'm going to hold it in there a bit longer. Plus, we're about halfway through the vat, and so more of the dye has been released already. Now, sometimes I get nervous just because I've been doing this for 7 years. Doesn't mean that I always believe it's going to turn out. Because sometimes you dip it in there and you're like, I don't really see what's going to happen. But this is looking lovely. All right, can we see this? This is really hard to see out here in this light. But it is turning a beautiful green color. I'll get some better pictures of it in a minute here. Okay, I'm getting down to the bottom of my pre-dyed skeins that I'm going to dip in the indigo. I do have a plan. If I have more dye, I am going to go in and get some undyed skeins and get them wet and then just make some blue yarn. The thing about indigo that is kind of nice is that it does not need a pre-mordant if you are only doing indigo. If I'm doing yellow beforehand, you definitely need a pre-mordant. So this is my last one. This is the DK Tweed base with the yellow colorway. This should be a little more vibrant as we dip it in. All right, you can start to see it is changing to green, so the change is a little more obvious. I'm going to go hang it up and we'll see what it looks like when it's all dry. Hello everybody, it's me, Tanya, coming to you from the future. The Indigo Vat Dye Day was about a week ago, I want to say. Maybe not quite, maybe 4 days ago, but it is now Tuesday, June 4th, and all of the indigo dye has been dried and skeined, and I wanted to do a little wrap-up of this video just to give you a little more information and to show you some of the colors, what they look like in their dried, skeined up form. So first things first, one thing I want to share with you about indigo is that indigo is different from other natural dyes that I work with. And that is that the way indigo adheres to the fiber is different. It is a chemical bond between the fiber and the indigo dye versus a physical bond of the dyes actually sticking on the fiber. So because of that, there is something that is called crocking, crocking, that is basically inevitable with indigo. And if you've ever had a pair of jeans that have been dyed with indigo, you will have probably experienced this. And that is when the indigo dye will rub off on your hands or maybe on your legs in the case of jeans. If you're knitting with it, sometimes if you're knitting with bamboo needles, it will rub off on the needles. And it is a process that's actually, it's a part of how the indigo becomes permanent. So there's no way you can completely get rid of crocking in indigo, at least not to my knowledge of what I've read or what I've experienced. But you can lessen it by making sure your indigo vat is well balanced, that all the indigo powder, or in my case, the pre-reduced crystals, are completely absorbed. So I try my hardest to do that with my vats. And also, we wash the skeins several times, in some cases after the yarn has dried, so before we skein it up. So the water never goes completely clear like it will with other dyes, but for indigo, we try to make it get rid of and wash out as much of the excess dye as possible. And you will have seen when I was dyeing in the video earlier, the very first skeins come out really dark because the vat is really strong at that time. And so it is generally those really dark skeins that will have the most crocking and will be the hardest for me to wash out all of the excess indigo. But I do my best, but just one thing to be a little aware of if you do purchase any of my indigo dyed yarn, that there is a possibility that you will have some crocking on your hands or your needles. Now, when you wash it, I've never had an experience with somebody where the dye, like say you're doing color work. So I actually did. I don't have them up here with me right now, but if I can find it, I'll put a picture. My spring rainstorm mitts were dyed with a dark indigo. So it was actually this purple. This is eggplant. They were knit with this and a golden yellow. I think it was this one, held, the same within the project, so to separate rows. And the color did not come off on the yellow at all. It did not blend. It did not. What's the word I'm looking for? It did not blend. It did bleed. It did not bleed at all. So generally speaking, you do not have to worry about that. I have not had a problem with it. But it will probably come off on your hands slightly. So good information to know. But after we did all of the washing, all of the hanging to dry, all of the skeining, we have these beautiful skeins of yarn left. So this is, like I said, is eggplant, and this is dyed on yak sock, which is a 70% superwash merino, 20% yak, 10% nylon. And this colorway actually started out as this. So it was this pink color, and when I dipped it into the indigo, the pink plus the blue made this purple color. So a lot of what I dyed last week was on my yak sock base or the yak silk DK, because I really like to dye. For one, those bases of mine were getting kind of low in what I had available for purchase, but I really love the richness that indigo can add to that color or that base, because it starts out as a gray color. So I'm just going to show you a few of the things that I put together. So this was one of the larger skeins of that yak sock in eggplant. And I also put together a lot of these 50-gram sets. Now this is what you need to make the spring rainstorm mitts. There's also another pattern, I believe it's called the Spring to It cowl. I'll see if I can put a picture in here. Whoops, I'm dropping stuff. That is also an excellent pattern. That is a free pattern on Ravelry. And it is great to use up 2 different colors, some beginning color work with 2 contrast 50-gram skeins. But I put together, so they're now in the shop if you're interested in making those mitts or you have another color work project. On the yak sock base, there are 13 different color combinations in the shop right now. So this is the eggplant and dusty rose color combo. And then I did a dusty rose paired with just the overalls, which is just indigo by itself that I dyed on the gray. So when I dipped it, the base was just the normal gray base. That's that one. And then the other one I brought up here, I only brought up 3, but there's lots of them. There's even some that are with the natural gray base. So like there's some green and gray as well. But this one is a Minnesota Northwoods and a golden snitch combination. So yeah, so like I said, maybe I'll flash some more colors here while I'm talking. There are lots of color options available. If that's something you're interested in, just check out the website under, I believe it says sock sets and 50-gram sets. So they'd be under the 50-gram sets. There are also some 50-gram sets in the Berry Tough sock base that I put in previously if you're looking for a different base to knit with. Okay, and then ironically, I took up 3 greens instead of some of the other colors I dyed. But the green starts out as this golden snitch color, and when it's dipped in the indigo, it becomes the darker Minnesota Northwoods. Now this is on the yak base, so of course it's going to look different. This, I showed you the yaks. Oh no, I didn't. I showed you the purple. This is the Minnesota Northwoods on yak sock. And this is Minnesota Northwoods on yak silk DK. So you can see it's a little bit plumper, a little shinier because it has the silk in it, but also still is that nice rich green color. And then as I get towards the end of the vat and what's left in there, there is generally not as much blue color left. So the colors are not as rich, but they're still very beautiful. This one started out as a golden snitch. And when I dipped it, it was meant to be Minnesota Northwoods, but it did not have quite as rich of a color, but it's still beautiful. You can see the yellow under it. This one is called Marsh Madness. So it has the beautiful yellow undertones and the green in there. And you can see some of the neps here, the little tweety bits, they even turned blue. So that's kind of fun. So you have a little bit of the blue mixed in there with the green and the yellow. But that's one that this is not a color that I always get. It sort of depends on what my indigo vat is doing for the day. And then one last color I wanted to show you. At the very end of the dyeing process, there's very little color left in my pot. And I get this beautiful blue color, which I call Mama's Boys. And it is blowing out a little bit. Let me see if I can fix the lighting slightly here. I don't know if that made, oh yeah, that's a little bit better. Okay, so it's just a nice light blue, but it's hard to see on here. It's very tonal. So yeah, very fun. This one is on Berry Tough sock. So I think I dyed 6 of these on Berry Tough sock. All right, I think that's it. That's all I have to show you. Thank you so much for joining me for this special Indigo Dye Day video. And I hope to come to you again soon, hopefully in the next week or so, before Zombie Knit Apocalypse, the week of the 20th, with a regularly scheduled podcast. It will kind of depend on how busy these strawberries are going. So we are just starting to pick strawberries. Maybe I'll throw in some strawberry pictures at the end here, but so far, so good. Fingers crossed. Hopefully we don't get any hail tonight. We're supposed to get storms. But we're hoping we can actually have some strawberries this year because it's been a couple years here on our farm. So anyway, enough waffling, and I will end this video, and I will see you all soon in the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.